In this week's Parsha, there are two psukim that are discussing the idea of emunah, our belief and our knowledge that Hashem hu Elikim, that Hashem is the one and only Eibishter. Number one, we have the pasuk Ata Hareisol Adas. You were shown to see ki Hashem hu Elikim, that Hashem is Elikim. Einoid Mulvade, there is no one besides him. Then we have a second pasuk. V'yadaito hayom, and you should know today v'ashevoisel v'avecha, and you should really take it to heart. Ki Hashem hu Elikim, that Hashem is the God. V'shamayim imal, in the heavens up above. V'ala oretz mitachas, on the earth down below. Einoid, there is no one else. In the first pasuk, it just says simply Ki Hashem hu Elikim, without specifying the shamayim and the oretz, etc. In the second pasuk, it specifies Hashem hu Elikim v'shamayim imal and v'ala oretz mitachas, in the heavens above and in the earth below. Now, simply the difference between the two psukim is the first pasuk Ata Hareisol Adas, you were shown to see, as its simple meaning is, it's referring to the knowledge that was shown to the Yidden at the time of Matan Torah. Hashem was revealed to the Yidden, and at that point they saw that Hashem is the one and only. Since Hashem, the Yidden saw the truth of Hashem's oneness as it is coming from Hashem, which from Hashem's perspective, there is no difference between Shamayim and Eretz. There's no difference between heavens and earth. So therefore, there is no need and there's no room. It doesn't make sense to start specifying within the knowledge, Vashamayim imal, v'la oretz mitochas. There is no difference. With the reality, the emes of Hashem is being revealed, then Hashem is all over the same. It's one and only. On the other hand, the pasuk where it speaks about v'yadaita, what you should know, v'ashevoisa, what you should take to heart, this is already a command to the person, that he needs to work hard to understand and to know and bring it down also to his heart, into his feelings, ki Hashem hu Elikim, that Hashem is the one and only. In other words, this is already a knowledge and a recognition in the oneness of Hashem, as is coming as a result of the effort of the person. So as far as the knowledge of the person is concerned, there's going to be differences between heaven and earth. And so each detail, Bashamayim imal, the heavens above, ala oretz mitachas, and on the earth down below, each one of these is a different type of understanding, a different type of knowledge, and that's why in this pasuk it is being specified individually. In fact, we find this in the Medrash on the pasuk v'yadaita, and this is what the Medrash says: Yisroi gave some sort of substance to avodah zarah, as the pasuk says. Ata yadati, now I know, ki gadol Hashem, that Hashem is greater, mikol Elikim, which seems to imply, the Rebbe is quoting over here the Mefoirish Matnas Gehuna on the Medrash, this seems to imply that the other things that Yisrael was aware of in his mind also were great, but Hashem is gadol, is greater, mikol Elikim. Then the Medrash goes on, we had Naaman. He was a general, an officer in Aram, and this is in a story which, when he comes to Elisha, etc., to be healed from his tzaras, and he was moide in some of Hashem's authority, so to speak. He says, "Hine no yadati ki ein elikim b'chol haaretz ki im b'Yisrael." There's no God in the whole world, on the whole of earth, besides for by the Yidden. As the Matnis Gehuna explains, that means he's testifying regarding the earth, but he doesn't say anything about the heavens. Then we come to Rachav. Rachav is the woman when the Yidden come into Eretz Yisrael, and first the two spies came to her. So she acknowledges that Hashem is the Eibishter over the heavens and the earth. As she says, Ki Hashem Elokeichem, Hu Elikim b'shamayim imal v'ala oretz mitachas. Not only in the heavens, but in the heavens, a place where you cannot see what's going on there. In other words, not only on earth, but also in the heavens where you can't see what's going on over there. She also says that the Eibishter is the Eibishter in the heavens. But nevertheless, there was something that she still left out. What does chaloloi shaloilam mean? So later on, in one of the footnotes, the Rebbe says chaloloi shaloilam can have a number of meanings. Chaloloi shaloilam sounds like the empty space of the world. But one of the pirushim that Rebbe is going to give later, it refers to klipa. In other words, things that are a void, seemingly where there's nothing there. And yet now Moshe comes along and makes Hashem the Eibishter even over Chaloli Shalom, even over these things that seem to be emptiness or void or even klipa. As the pasuk says, Ki Hashem hu Elokim b'shamayim mimal v'la'aretz mitachas ein oid. What is ein oid coming to include? That there's no one else, even b'chalali shalom, even in all the empty space, in the void. That means, what's the Medrash telling us? Or as we understand the pasuk now, that Ki Hashem hu Elokim, when we speak about it, as far as the person knows it, as far as the person puts in the effort to understand it, there's going to be now three categories. How Hashem is b'shamayim mimal, in the heavens above. How Hashem is v'la'aretz mitachas, on the earth below. And then Einoi, there's nothing else, even in any of the chalali shalom, even in any of the other space of the world. Says the Rebbe, but we need to understand, from the fact that Toras Emes, Torah of truth, tells us these three details in the mitzvah of Yadaita, of the knowledge of Hashem, is understood that the division in this knowledge is not only in order to make sure that the person doesn't make a mistake because of the lacking understanding of the person. Toras Emes is telling us this. That means that in the idea of Hashem Hu Elokim, there is in fact a real difference between Shamayim, Eretz, and Chaloli Shaloilam. In other words, when the person is holding by the Yadaita, by a real, proper, his boinanus, contemplation and knowledge with real seichel, there is going to be some sort of novelty in each one of these three knowledges. There is a difference between each one of them. So we need to understand, says the Rebbe. In seichel, in logic, what room is there to say that Hashem Hu Elokim, that Hashem is the only one, to say that Chas v'Shalom, it's as if only Bashamayim Mimal? How could you even think that therefore you have to specifically say, no, we have to understand that Hashem is the only one, also V'la'aretz mitachas. And then a third chiddush to say, you know what, Einoi, there's no one else, even b'chalali shalom, even in any of the other space of the world. Now, seemingly you'd be able to answer this based on what's known, in the way the pasuk Ramal Kol Goyim Hashem is explained. What does Ramal Kol Goyim Hashem mean? That the Goyim think that Hashem is too great. So Hashem Azav, that Hashem left, abandoned the earth, because they think in that they are describing the greatness of Hashem. They think that it would be, for Hashem, it would be considered that he's degrading himself, that he's lowering himself to have to get involved with the creations down on earth. And therefore he left the running of the world and the rulership over the world, over all the things of the earth. He left it in the hands of the stars and the planets, the constellations, etc. So you might say that's why the pasuk is coming to say, no, v'yodaita, you should know, ki Hashem hu Elokim, that Hashem is the only one, not only the heavens up above, but also all aretz mitachas, also down on the earth below. Einoi, there's no one besides him, that Hashem is the ruler also on the earth down below. That's what we may have thought the pasuk is trying to say. But the Alter Rebbe in Tanya says that the pasuk v'yodaita, that you should know that Hashem is also the only one, v'la'aretz mitachas, is coming to negate not this mistake that maybe Hashem abandoned the earth and he's only in heaven, but rather he's coming to negate this idea that we may think that there is some other God, Elokim nishra b'mayim mitachas la'aretz, is soaking in the water beneath the earth. In other words, that we're negating some sort of Elokim, some sort of Inyan of Avodah Zarah, basically, that is around, but somewhere beneath the earth, in the water. So in other words, it's not negating the fact that Hashem abandoned the earth, but coming to negate an Inyan that you might think there's something else going on over here under the earth. And what's forcing the Alter Rebbe to say this is because when we look at the context of the Psukim, when it says v'yodaita, you should know that the Eibishter is the only one in the heavens above and the earth below, etc., it's coming in continuation to what the Psukim said earlier. It said, Ato harei soladas, you were shown by Matan Torah that Hashem hu Elokim. So this is by Matan Torah. And the Torah is coming to tell you what's happening, in other words, to warn you how it has to be, different to the way the Torah was warning you what you shouldn't think, what it's negating previously in the Pasuk. The Pasuk said, Pentashchisun, you might act in a corrupt way, and you might start looking and making images of the different things that both you see in the heaven as well as here in this part of the pasuk. The psukim are speaking about images of the fish that are in the water beneath the earth, etc. So from the fact that the Torah is saying that's not the right way, and then the pasuk says in continuation to this, v'yodaita, you should know that Hashem is the only one, both in the heavens and above, and ha'aretz mitachas. So obviously that's what it's coming to negate, that we shouldn't think that there's some God, that is some Avodah Zarah, but Mayim mitachas la'aretz, in the earth, beneath, in the water beneath the earth. So in other words, if that's the case, we're back to the question of why does the Torah need to negate this idea of thinking that there is some other Eibishter. We should know not only by Shamayim Ibal there's no one else, but by Alaretz Mitachas also not. Why are these two different concepts that need to be explained? Says the Rebbe, the truth of the matter is, the Alter Rebbe himself asked this question in Tanya Shar Yichud Ve'emunah. The Alter Rebbe says, would it ever enter your mind that there is some sort of God soaking in the water beneath the earth that you need to warn so much that Vashei Voisel of Avecha take it to heart? So what does the Alter Rebbe explain? The Alter Rebbe explains that when the Pasuk says, V'yadaita, you should know that Hashem is the only one, B'shamayim, Imav, L'Aretz, Mitachas, is coming to tell us, coming to negate not that we shouldn't think that there's another God, Chas v'Shalom, but rather it's coming to tell us we shouldn't think that there's any other entity, any other Metzias besides for Hashem. Because in truth, there is nothing besides for Hashem. Everything is absolutely bottled, everything is completely nullified to Hashem. Why is that? How is that? Because since all creations are being created, not yesh meyesh, one thing out of the other, but rather being created yesh meyayin, something out of nothing. Now, the Rebbe explains, therefore, all of the creations constantly need to be coming onto, need to be relying on the power of Hashem to remain in their existence. If the power of Hashem would be removed from them, even for a second, chas v'shalom, then out of this nivra, out of this created being, automatically would be completely go back to nothingness as before Sheshis Meibirations, before the 6 days of creations, literally. Says the Rebbe, now we would be able to explain why the pasuk needs to say separately V'alo aretz mitochas, to come to explain that even this very materialistic world, a world that seems very, very much as a yesh gomer, as a complete separate entity to our eyes, nevertheless we need to understand even something that's so lowly is really completely nothing to Hashem. That's the general explanation what the Alter Rebbe says. But says the Rebbe, seemingly this needs further clarification, further explanation. Yes, it's true that since ala aretz mitochas einoid, since this idea to recognize that even the things on earth that we see as such big metziasin, such a materialistic world that seems so real, to realize that this is ayin v'efes mamish, since it's not something in our experience that really feels like that, we need to have yes, we understand we need a separate warning for down here on earth, Vashei Voisel of Avecha, to really take it to heart. In other words, that it should really feel it, it should resonate with us in our hearts. So we understand why I would say Vashei Voisel of Avecha regarding these things. In other words, because in our feeling, it's very different to say that our world is also completely bottled to Hashem. It's easier for us to say it regarding the spiritual, the heavenly things. But, says the Rebbe, the problem with this is, the pasuk starts off with the word v'yadaita. It's not only in our heart we should recognize that there's a difference, it means that also in the logical and rational understanding regarding ala aretz mitochas, we need some sort of separate explanation or a separate warning. So therefore the question is, the explanation, the logical explanation why einoid, that there's nothing really besides for Hashem, that everything is bottled to Hashem, the same logic that tells us this regarding the heavens above, it's exactly the same logic regarding the earth below. There's no difference between any creatures in regards to this, between one thing and the other. Because every single thing that Hashem creates, whether it's in the spiritual realm, the heavenly bodies, or down here on earth, everything needs Hashem's power inside of it to constantly keep it alive and give it existence. So how can we separate in the v'yadaita, in other words, again, in the logical explanation why it's einoid, why would it be a difference between the heavenly bodies and the things down here on earth? Another proof, says the Rebbe, that this difference between the heavenly things and the things down here on earth is not only to make sure that we're not making a mistake, because that would come again, because the earth is such a materialistic thing, we could think that it's, an absolute yesh, something a real metzias. So it's not only that, but rather there is really a difference, even in seichel, to say that maybe there is a difference between the heavens and the earth, and that's why we need a different explanation. Says the Rebbe, another proof for this is from the fact that this idea that all creatures need to have constantly the koyach of Hashem to be able to remain in existence, the Alter Rebbe brings regarding this the Pirush of the Baal Shem Tov on the pasuk L'olam Hashem dvarcha nitzav b'shamayim, that your words Hashem are constantly in the heavens. Your words that you said Hashem yehi rokia b'soich hamayim, that the firmament should be within the waters. These very words that Hashem said yehi rokia, they are constantly standing inside the heavens to give them life. Then the Alter Rebbe goes on and says that this is true not only in regards to the shamayim, not only in regards to the heavens. The same is true regarding all creations in all the worlds, the upper and the lower. Even this physical lowly world and the doime mamish, even the inanimate object, their whole metzius, all of their existence is constantly dependent on the words of Hashem in the Asorim Amoris and the 10 utterances that are constantly creating everything, even the doimim, even the inanimate, to bring it from nothing into something. Furthermore, the Alter Rebbe continues, that even those things that are not mentioned directly in the Asorim Amoris, all the objects of the world that are not mentioned, all the creatures in the world, the creations in the world that are not mentioned, are also getting their chayis from the Asorim Amoris, which need to come down many, many levels, all the way from the Asorim Amoris until they end up creating this particular item that's not mentioned, as the Alter Rebbe mentions various different ways of how this works. And that is that the name of each object, the way it's called in Lashon HaKodesh, that becomes the keli, the vessel to that limited chayas of the vitality that's coming through these words, through these letters, which originate in the Asorim Amoris, but then came down many, many, many different levels. Says the Rebbe, but let's go back to the original point. What does the pasuk say? The pasuk that we're bringing this all proof from. The pasuk was L'olam Hashem dvarcha nitzav b'shamayim. The pasuk that we have this directly about is about Hashem's words in the heavens. In other words, we're specifically speaking about Shamayim different to all the other creatures. And remember, in this pasuk, we're not speaking about how the person feels about it and what the person knows about it. We're speaking about in reality that Hashem's words are in the heavens, and we're specifically saying the heavens. That itself tells us that there must be some difference between the way things are in the heavens and the way things are on earth, not only from the person's perspective, but also according to the truth. The way the words of Hashem is found in each one, there's going to be a difference, the way it's in the Shamayim and the way it's in everything else. And that's why the pasuk specifically mentions the idea of Shamayim. And therefore, because of this difference, there is a chidush, there is a certain novelty in the way Hashem Hu Elikim, in the way He is Al Haaretz Mitachas, different to the way He is B'Shamayim Imal. So we need to understand what is going on over here. Says the Rebbe, the explanation is like this. The chidush of the Baal Shem Tov is not only in the general idea that all of creation is all dependent on the koyach of Hashem, which is constantly creating everything and giving everything life and giving it existence. But it's more than that. The idea is that also the individual personal character, the individuality, the properties of each and everything individual is also getting its chayis from Hashem. As the Alter Rebbe brings, the words that you said, Hashem, Yehi Rokia b'soich hamayim, the heavens should be within the waters, the firmament should be within the waters. These very words, these very letters, are standing always inside the Rekia Hashemayim, umeluboshes, they are clothed in all of the Rekim, and so too by all other creatures, and in every single one there's something called the Hislapshus. The words, the letters of the Asorim Amoros are literally clothed inside the individuality of each creature. In other words, it's not only that the Nivra, the created being, needs to rely on, even for its existence, on the power of Hashem, but then, once it has the power of Hashem, you could say that this Nivra is like something unique, distinct, separate from the Koyach of Hashem that's giving him his life and its existence. An example for that sort of model could be like the light of the sun, which obviously is completely dependent on the source, on the luminary of the sun. It's coming from the sun. The proof of that is as soon as it's going to be something that's going to separate between the light and the luminary, the source of light, the light wouldn't exist. Nevertheless, you could still say the light is a separate entity from the sun. But here we're saying something else. The very every single nivra, every single created being, the koyach of the boide is clothed, is dressed, is inside, is invested in that nivra itself. In other words, that there's a very strong connection between the koyach haboide and every detail and every part of the individuality of the created being. So that there is nothing separate from Hashem. And that's really what explains to us perfectly this idea of Einoid, that there's no Metzias, there's no existence outside of godliness. Because since Hashem's word is clothed in the Nivra itself, within the created being itself, in its space, in its own area, therefore what follows is that each and every Nivra is never really separated from the word of Hashem. So that the Chayis and the Nefesh, the vitality, the soul of every single individual creature is the word of Hashem that's clothed inside of it. And therefore we understand that every single Nivra, every single created being in truth is absolutely nothing. Because it's all about the word of Hashem that's inside of it constantly. Says the Rebbe, this is now also the reason why each Nivra has to have a separate Dvar Hashem, a separate word of Hashem. As the Alter Rebbe elaborates, that even the inanimate things has a spiritual soul, a spiritual life force. Because in order that this koyach of Hashem should be able to clothe itself into an individual creature, we need that this koyach aliki, this godly energy, should lower itself down from its lofty level and be contracted according to, proportionate to, this nivra, this created being, and each one according to its exact details. And the Rebbe explains, if the godly energy would just remain in its highest form, basically an unlimited and infinite koyach, an infinite energy, so then it would be completely shaloi be'erech, completely higher from being able to clothe itself inside the nivra. Now the Rebbe sort of just clarifies that even though it's true that Hashem is koil yachal, that Hashem of course could do anything, so therefore of course Hashem could make sure that his infinite energy should come down into a finite being. But we know that Hashem wanted that the Nivroim, that all creatures should be able to have some sort of comprehension, some sort of understanding, as much as possible at least, according to the limitation that Hashem gave them. Hashem wanted that everyone should be able to somehow relate to this whole idea of creation. And therefore Hashem did create the Nivroim not in a way that it's completely be'ein aroich, in other words, that it should just go in because Hashem is koil yachal, so just this infinite power just goes into the created being, the finite being. But rather, Hashem created everything in a seder v'adraga, in a way that everything goes down with what's called a seder ishtalshus, as it's known, in other words, step by step, coming down from one level to the other. That the Eibush is kayachol mitzamtzim, narrowing down the spiritual ashpah, so that it should be able to be lefierech, proportionate, to be able to come in, clothe itself into the nivra. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand why we said that there's a chidush in Hashem hu elikim, and why we divide this into three separate concepts, three separate levels of knowledge and understanding. There's Bashamayim Imal, up in the heavens above, Ala Oretz mitachas, down in the earth below. And then we say Einoid, which we said is Afilu b'chaloli shalolim, even in the areas that's a complete void, a complete emptiness. That is, since the idea of Einoid, we explained, is the way Hashem's koyach is coming b'eslapshus, is clothing itself in each and every nivra. It's not just a general koyach, as we said before, that Hashem is making sure that it exists, but it's connecting with it in a personal way. So therefore, logically, there would be room to differentiate and to say, now, where does this apply? Where can we say that the word of Hashem is mamish really coming down, clothing itself in the created being? Well, perhaps that's only b'tzvah Shemayim, only in the heavenly bodies and the heavenly beings, which are higher than the lowly beings down here on earth, and therefore, perhaps they are more of a keli, they're more of a receptacle to be able to get that godly energy. Whereas ala aretz mitachas, down here on earth, in very lowly physical materialistic things, which are not a keli to godliness, perhaps we would think that the word of Hashem cannot come in a way that it's slapshus, mamish, clothing itself inside of it. Yes, of course we would still understand that they always need the power of Hashem to exist. But perhaps we would say that this koyach of Hashem is not coming in a way that it's found, so to speak, connecting in a personal, internal way, clothing itself inside of them. So that's why we need to say, Al Haaretz mitachas. Then there's even a greater chiddush. What about those things that are not even mentioned in the Asara Ma'amoros Shabbat? In other words, there are things that are so low which are not even able to get chayis, their energy, directly from the Asara Ma'amoros and Torah itself. Rather, the chayis has to go down from level to level until it contracts itself to clothe itself to be created, these individual things. So here we have to say, Hashem Hu Elokim, that even there, Hashem is really connected with it in a very personal way, and therefore that thing is also completely bottled to that chayis of Hashem. Says the Rebbe, we know that every single thing is also found in the avoid of each individual person. Because we know that a person is like called Olam Katan, a small world, in which is reflected all of the inyanim, all of the things, all the ideas of the big world. The Rebbe explains, we know that the tachlis is the purpose of every single inyan in avodas Hashem is that it should come down into ma'isa b'poel into action. Ha-ma'isa or action is the main thing. Says the Rebbe, but we need to know that in order to reach down into Eretz, in order to be able to penetrate even the most lowly things with godliness and kedusha, you need to go through, there's a certain seder ishtalshalos, there's a certain order. Because generally there are these three stages, as we discussed in the pasuk of Yadaita. There's knowing how Hashem is b'shamayim imal, then bringing him down even v'alaretz mitochas, and then furthermore, even einoid, even b'chalol shalolim, even in that place of a void. The Rebbe says it's in accordance to these three divisions that the Alter Rebbe actually says. The Rebbe is tying these three things with the general point that the Alter Rebbe says. Lo'elam Hashem dvarcha nitzav b'shamayim. There's the pasuk that says that Hashem's words are in the heavens. So that's literally in the heavenly bodies. Then the Alter Rebbe says, V'chein b'chol haburim, and so too in all creations, even Eretz alazu agashmis. So that would more fit with like the second idea. Osa la'aretz mitachas. And then the Alter Rebbe says, and even in the lowly things that are not even mentioned in the Asara Ma'amoros, which as the Rebbe clarifies in the footnote over here, that this could be corresponding to the idea of Klippa, which is a place that's seemingly void of Elikus. And the Rebbe explains, in order that the avoid of a Yid should, throughout his day, should be properly, so he needs to have the Achana first, coming before the day, which is when he goes to sleep at night. This is part of Avodas Hashem as well. What happens when a Yid goes to sleep at night? The Neshama is going up above Bashamayim and receiving Chayas, getting energized with new life. And the Rebbe explains this is why as soon as one wakes up from the sleep, as soon as he gets up, the Seder Hayom starts off with Moida Ani Lefonecha, I'm thanking Hashem that you returned my Neshama to me. In other words, this Haidah, this thanking and this submission is to Hashem that gave me back my neshama with refreshed koiches. This neshama that's coming, it's rooted by Shamayim. So that's step number one. Then comes the avoid of the Yid to cause that this neshama that he has should now spread to the guf as well. And that's going to be accomplished through his avodas hatfilah, etc. In other words, that the neshama should be felt also in the gashmis, in the guf, in the earthliness of the person. So this is step number two. But within this, says the Rebbe, really there's two stages, and this is going to correspond to the next two ideas of Balaretz Mitochas and even Chaloli Shaloilam. So the next stage is when the Yid has davened in Shul. So this is the next point. In other words, he's davening, and from davening you go to learning. This helps the Neshama to spread also to his guf, to all of his individual aspects, but it's still within the realm of Kedusha. Similar to the Nivroim, to those things that the Alter Rebbe mentions, which are receiving their chayis in a direct way from the Asara Ma'amoros that are mentioned in the Torah. But then comes the next stage to avoid in Chaloli Shaloilam. In the world, in the outside world, which is Hanigba, Minig Derech Eretz, getting involved in work and business, etc., or generally the idea that a person is involved in mundane things, similar to those things that are not even mentioned in Torah, like those things that are not mentioned in the Asara Ma'amoros Shabbat Torah. So when a person has that right, correct hachana, Bashamayim imal, first again, the way the neshama is up above and just starting to come into his body. And Valaoretz mitachas, and then he starts carrying it down through the davening and learning. He now has the koyach to draw down godliness also into the mundane, so that even the Gashmi Sa'olam is completely not Teufus Makam, doesn't take up any space. It doesn't. It's not a Metzias at all. Rather, is Megala even in this area of Chalali Shaloilam, how in truth, Einoi, there's nothing besides for Hashem.